Hello and welcome back to part 3. This time we're going to take a look on the entity, go into more details about what is an entity and where do they come from, how do we find the entities. So this was the diagram that I showed previously, and I highlighted the entities as the book, the reader, the author and the publisher, all real world things. So an entity, well, if we look it up in a dictionary I took here from Merriam-Webster, which is apparently a somewhat trustworthy dictionary. I looked it up in Oxford Dictionary as well, and you sort of get the same thing. So an entity is something, sort of a being or something of an existence, and we will take out the important part here, that it is a distinct existence and some kind of objective or conceptual reality. So an entity has an identity separate from those of its members. So that means that my reader, for example, is an entity, and I can have multiple instances of that entity, meaning I can have multiple readers and I can have multiple authors, and there are multiple publishers, but they are all unique, even though they're sort of grouped together into one entity. So in Java you have a class and you can create instances of that class. In the ER diagram you have an entity and you can have instances of that entity. Alright, so it's sort of the basic building block. I mentioned that earlier, but it's an entity relationship model. So you have your entities and they have relationships between them. That's the important part of this. They are objects from the real world, or at least within the domain that your customer, or whatever system you're doing, if there's no customer, then someone else has made this requirement of you. And it's a concept that already exists. It might be virtual, I guess, but they do represent something kind of real, and the properties are something real. So common examples might be there's a client or person, car, cinema reservation, order, product, and so on. All kinds of different real world concepts can be made into an entity. And each entity is given its own unique name within the diagram, and it can have a number of properties or attributes. So as I highlighted previously, these are the attributes of the entity, and we will come back to where they come from and how to define them, because you can see there are different types of entities, different types of attributes. All right, so that's an entity. Where do they come from? How do we find them? And you're going to look for nouns mainly in various kinds of descriptions. Maybe you have a textual description from your customer, which is what we're going to work with mainly in this course. It's sort of like an interview where the customer describes to you in their own phrasing what is it they want you to do. Right? In your projects, maybe you have requirements or user stories or use cases, which can all be used to define your entities and find these entities. We are looking for what is called common names. So that's a thing, a teacher, a student, a city, a brand, a vehicle, and so on. And as I showed you a bunch of other examples, we are not looking for proper names, meaning Troels, Richard, Ole. They may be instances of the entity person or teacher, but they are not entities in themselves. Horsens is not an entity. It could be an instance of the entity city. Right? Horsens is a city. JetBrains is a company. BMW is a brand or a vehicle, but you can have multiple brands in the entity. And so if you have a brand entity, maybe an instance is BMW and another instance is Audi, and another one is Opel, and so on. VIA is a university, I guess, but not an entity in itself. So we're looking for the common names, and my example is going to be a sort of description from the customer initially, and I have some user stories also, so we can see both approaches. So let's assume this is it's a very short description, but maybe it's just part of a description. But we are going to read through it and put down the potential entities, the candidates. Maybe not all of them are going to be entities, but we mark down the candidates. We're going to look for nouns. We will remove duplicates. I don't want teacher twice. That's not relevant. There are some nouns that are irrelevant, and there are some nouns that have only one instance. So many students. Student is a noun. We put that down as a potential entity. Can study at VIA, but VIA is one instance, so we don't include that in my candidates. Each student, I have that already, is signed up for a program. So program is noun, it might be a potential entity. And attends multiple courses. There we go, courses. Okay, I had an animation glitch here, I don't know what happened. So I have 3 potential entities so far. A program, which I have marked already, is led by a head of program. So this might be an entity. It could also just be an attribute on the program. That's something you will have to figure out later on when you work more with this. Sometimes such a person, maybe this is an entity, but it sort of references back to the head of program, so we might leave this out. We could include it and then see if something more comes of it. I'm going to leave it out for this time. This person leads multiple programs, and I have that already. Courses, I have that, are taught by teachers. So let's put down teacher. Sometimes a teacher teaches multiple courses. We have these already. Students is present here. May be hired as instructors so that they there we go. So that they teach other students in specific workshops. And we'll put down workshop. So these are my potential entities, and they, you can start by putting them as small boxes in your diagram, and then as you move on, you will find other information about the entities in this description. Relationships, for example, which we will get back to, but we can see that courses are taught by teachers, indicating that there's a relationship between teachers and courses, but we'll cover that later on. So here we found the entities based on this description. In your semester project, you're going to have user stories, but the idea is the same. I have taken out a handful of example user stories. This is also about books and I think an online bookshop, we could call it. So there's a shopping cart and we can see available books, and the administrator can see a list of employees and 8 books, and the employees can change the status of orders to, received and processed and sent, I guess, something like that. So you go through your user stories, you find the nouns again, we find an administrator. They can see a list, so that's basically a noun, but list is not really an entity, a concept that we wanted like that. Instead, this may indicate something about the relationship between administrator and employees. So we'll get back to this later on. But employees is a noun and might be relevant. Administrator again, so we ignore that. I want to be able to add new books. So a book is a potential entity. We have a customer and I want to be able to see a list. So again, ignored, and books, we have that. As a customer, I want to add a book to my shopping cart, which is a new concept, so that might also be a potential entity. As a customer, I want to place an order, potential entity of my shopping cart, we have that. As an employee, I want to be able to change the status of orders. So status is well, it's something that describes an order, so it's not a noun. Is it a adjective, adverb? It may indicate that this here is some information about an order, meaning it's an attribute on the order. So we'll cover that when we get to the part about attributes. Right, so some of these nouns may be entities. We have administrator, employee, book, order, shopping cart. And some of these nouns may be attributes in the status. We'll get back to relationships because, as I mentioned, they may also be indicated by the description and attributes. We have that here. So this is how you find the entities, right? And that's enough for this part. Thank you for watching.